Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation that we're going to have. I am Speaker-designate Lisa Demuth from District 13A, and it is my pleasure to share with you the House Republican plans and priorities that we have for the next 2 years that are coming forward. I want to remind you we watched an $18 billion surplus be spent. Not only was that spent on the backs of Minnesotans, another $10 billion of taxes and fees were added to support purely partisan priorities. And I'm happy to tell you today that those days are over. In the House of Representatives, House Republicans stand with 67 members in our caucus. As you have watched the news, we know that Democrats no longer have 67. There is no longer a tie in the state of Minnesota. Democrats will be coming in with 66 members. What that does is that gives us an organizational majority that we fully intend to exercise that right. We will be showing up on January 14th, ready to do the work that Minnesotans have sent us to the House of Representatives to do. House Republicans are ready to act on what we have heard from Minnesotans across the state over the last 2+ years. We have been listening, and in order to act on those things, we know that Minnesotans want us to stop the rampant fraud in the state of Minnesota. We know that it has gone unnoticed or uncared for, and there has been a lack of accountability when there is known fraud, and we look forward to putting an end to that. The way that we are going to do that is we are going to have a committee that the sole purpose is focusing on stopping the fraud, rooting it out, and holding our agencies accountable to end this. Minnesota taxpayers are tired of funding the fraud. House Republicans are ready to make that change. We also heard from Minnesotans across the state that they want their lives to be affordable. Democrats over the last 2 years did the exact opposite thing. Again, spending an $18 billion surplus, but raising taxes, raising fees on Minnesotans, hurting the family budget. And the way we are going to accomplish part of this goal is we are going to be repealing that tax on Social Security. We know that Democrats pushed through an automatic gas tax increase that hurts family budgets. We know that we have to find ways for affordable energy. We have to make energy reliable and affordable, and one of the ways that we plan to do that is repeal the nuclear moratorium. Minnesotans also want their communities to be safe, and House Republicans here in the state of Minnesota join together in demanding that criminals will be held accountable for their crimes. To my right, your left, you will see that we have a poster outlining the top pillars and areas of focus that we will be laser intent focused on this next 2 years. These are going to drive the decisions that we make on policy, on spending, and on saving. This is what we have heard across the state from Minnesotans, and we plan to act on that. It is my honor now to introduce to you Majority Leader Niska, and he will go through the balance of the rest of the areas that we're going to be focused on. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Speaker Demuth. As she said, my name is Harry Niska. I'm honored to represent the folks in District 31A in Anoka County, and also to serve as the House Majority Leader in this biennium. In addition to what Speaker Demuth had said, we know that Minnesotans want fewer mandates and higher standards in our education system, in our schools, so that we can assure that the schools have the flexibility and the tools to make sure kids can read, can do math, can do all the basic skills they need to succeed in the economy of the future. Less than 50% of the students in Minnesota schools right now can read or do math at grade level. That has to change, and that's going to change when Republicans are able to pass the reforms that we're going to be advocating for. We've heard that people want Minnesota tax dollars to be spent helping Minnesotans. That means that we need to defund the fraud. That means that we need to defund college or free health care. That's something that Minnesota Republicans are going to stand behind. And Minnesotans want us to build for the future. That means that we need to have permitting reform that allows us to build the infrastructure and other projects without unnecessary red tape. And so we're going to be working to ensure that Minnesota is an excellent place to start a business, to have a job, to live and to work and to create jobs. So those are the priorities. Those are the things we intend to bring forward to serve the people of Minnesota when we show up for work on day one, and we're ready to take questions.
Madam Speaker, what if Democrats don't show and you don't have a quorum day one?
That's a great question. That is a rumor that we have been hearing, as you've seen put out. What I will tell you is House Republicans are going to be here. We are ready for work. We are ready to get to work for the state of Minnesota. There is absolutely no reason why Democrats wouldn't show up on the first day of session and be ready to work for their constituents. There is no reason why taxpayers should be on the hook for paying for people that are not going to be at their jobs. And so our expectation is House Republicans will be here ready to go, and we expect that Democrats don't. If they are not here, we will exercise every opportunity to either look at recalls. We know that we definitely know that constituents expect their people to be here at work, and we do not stand for anyone that chooses not to show up.
You mean recall elections? You would try recall
Whatever
elections?
opportunity is out there, if they choose to do this, we will explore it and we will act.
And what about forcing attendance? Could you get law enforcement involved? Are you exploring law enforcement bringing members back, compelling attendance? Other states have gone through that.
We are absolutely expecting that Democrats will show up on the first day of session and be ready to get to work.
Are you talking? Are you back channeling? Are you and Speaker Hortman talking anymore?
There have been some recent conversations, but at this point there is no need for a power sharing agreement because there is not equal power in the state of Minnesota. There is 67 Republicans, 66 Democrats, and so we are working forward on that. We do know that there was a question put out whether or not 68 votes were needed to organize. I know that there are 133 elected representatives that their constituents expect them to be in their desks on the House floor, ready to get to work and do the work of Minnesota.
Madam Speaker, could you, there's so many ifs in this whole thing, but if Representative Tabke prevails in court, and if he shows up expecting to have an election certificate, will the Republicans attempt to vote to not seat him as they are empowered to do by the Constitution?
I think it's very important to look at the election in Scott County that is in question. And we know that every vote needs to count. We know that we have to make sure that our elections are fair in this state. And knowing that there were 20 ballots thrown away means that there were 20 disenfranchised voters, and that cannot be. We are waiting for that court decision, but we know that every voter should have their vote fairly counted, and we will absolutely stand behind the voters of Minnesota to ensure that that happens.
I just have a question about how we should refer to you. You introduced yourself as Speaker-designate. You referred to Representative Niswa as the majority leader. Which is it? The gentleman asking the question referred to you as the Speaker. What are you?
I am Speaker-designate Demuth.
Are you going to take the title of Speaker of the House?
Yes, I am.
When this all settles, you know, the DFL says if it's tied, that you should be power sharing. If it ends up tied, once all the court stuff's done, do you have any plans to put Democrats on committees or do a power sharing agreement?
It's very interesting because when we knew that there was a tie before the court case, right after the election, you were here and you heard the fact that we were able to come up together with a 67-67 power sharing where we came up with committees and co-chairs. What I expected and what was said during an interview was that, are there conversations going with people from the other side of the aisle? Those conversations always go on. What we have now seen, though, because of what the Democrats have said, that they're not going to show up, brings into question how serious they were about an actual power sharing agreement. There is not a tie right now in the state of Minnesota. There is a special election that's been called for the 28th of January, and even that is in question. But what we've seen is Democrats, through the press, are choosing to say that they're not going to work with Republicans in any way, and that's unacceptable here in the state of Minnesota.
Can you explain how the recall elections work? Can you representatives create a recall election for a certain person, or doesn't that happen organically with people in a certain district?
Absolutely. We can go ahead and touch on that. I will have Majority Leader Niska talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the Minnesota Constitution says that the grounds for recall are misfeasance or nonfeasance of office. It's clear, and legislators are specifically referenced in that. So there's a process set out in the Minnesota Constitution. We think if nonfeasance of office means anything with legislators not showing up for work at the statutorily defined time in law that we have to show up for work is nonfeasance of office. And so certainly any Minnesotan who's member of the legislature doesn't show up for work, we think has the ground to bring to begin the process of a recall election.
Is there a precedent for this, under this type of scenario?
We're not aware of it, no.
And how did you send that to the Secretary of State, or logistically, what are the steps?
You petition to the Minnesota Supreme Court for to go forward with collecting signatures.
Okay, so the Minnesota Supreme Court would have to give the green light to collecting signatures. And then you'd have to get the threshold of signatures in a district?
Yeah.
Can we come back to committee structure? At this point, are the committees the same? Do you expect to completely throw them out? Do you expect to have chairs? What would the balance of power look like? Can you dive into that a little?
Right now, knowing that there's not a power sharing agreement that's needed because of the fact that we have 67 members, they have 66, there would not be co-chairs needed. We have Republican chairs that are doing the work. In fact, today, as you remember, is the deadline for when our chairs had sent out letters to the agencies and to the commissioners asking for additional information. Today's that deadline. I don't know that all of that has been returned, but we don't need co-chairs if there is not a tie or a power sharing agreement. Our expectation is Republicans will be chairing the committees.
And the balance, would you strike some Democrats currently from committees? Because currently it's tied on committees, yeah.
Currently, it is tied on committees, and I would say that's yet to be determined. But what I will tell you is if Democrats don't show up for work, why would they be given a committee seat at all? They have to be ready to work. But the fact that there are less Democrats than Republicans, we very possibly will be reducing the number of Democrats on each committee.
Back to the tab key question, please. So even if the court upholds that election, the judge upholds that election, you don't intend to seat him, it sounds like, because you don't.
So we're still waiting for the judge's ruling. Obviously, the judge is going to issue some sort of findings of fact, we expect. Brad Tabke's lawyers said that that's just a recommendation to the legislature. And the Minnesota Constitution is very clear that each house is the ultimate authority for the returns of its members. So if Aaron Paul, his campaign brings a contest to the Minnesota House, it is our constitutional obligation to judge that, and we would intend to do that.
And it sounds like you expect that he will do that, so you do not expect to be seating tab key, it sounds like.
That's a process that we would take seriously in the House.
Well, it
Under
sounds like
what
you.
situation would you not seat Tapke? What would the facts have to be for you not to seat him?
There's 20 voters who weren't able to vote in a election decided by 14 votes, and a number of us have described our concerns about that election.
And is there precedent for a court compelling the seating of a member? Have you found that in case law?
No, the precedent is exactly the opposite. In the Pavlak case, the court said this goes back to the House, and the House was the final rule, the final word on that. And the Minnesota Constitution is very clear about that as well.
About the priorities and the fraud committee specifically, can you go into a little bit more detail about what that, is that like oversight hearings you're talking about? Are there specific legislative proposals, whether there's some the governor introduced or others that you anticipate that committee moving through? Like, what is that actually gonna look like?
Sure.
Is there a chair yet?
I'll answer both of those questions. So yes, the fraud committee will be fraud and agency oversight. There will be subpoena power within that, being able to look and get answers on what we have known is fraud and holding those agencies accountable. Yes, there is a chair already chosen. That committee will be chaired by Representative Kristen Robbins.
Doesn't
And
all
will
this-
any proposals for like proposals, you know, new laws or new statutes?
Sure, we
Will
are-
those also go through those can you talk about what you might do for those? Do you have any ideas on that?
Absolutely. So we are still working on the actual bills that'll come through and the process there. But as you know, as I referenced earlier, that all of our committee chairs have sent out letters to the agencies asking for a number of different things. The number of full-time equivalent employees, how many are actually filled or not filled, what type of office space is either filled or not filled right now, ways to find cost savings, because remember, we're headed for a deficit in a short number of years, even after $18 billion surplus, even after raising the state budget like over $10 billion. And so we know that we need cost savings. We are asking those agencies to provide that information. Also, when there's known fraud in the agency, what are they doing to combat it? All of that work is being done first within our committees and then secondary and right alongside in the committee for fraud and agency oversight. You will see this theme ring true as you've been hearing over the last number of years from House Republicans that we need to stop the fraud in the state. This is one path forward.
Do you have thoughts on the governor's fraud proposals released Friday, like some of them, like beefing up the Medicaid fraud unit?
You know, I think it's very interesting that right before the start of session, after fraud has been known for years in the state of Minnesota, that the governor, instead of under a full trifecta, coming up with bills that would have handled fraud in a better way, decided to do an executive order to try to combat fraud and actually have the executive branch police itself. That doesn't work. And so are we willing to work with the governor on ways to stop fraud in the state of Minnesota? That is under consideration, but House Republicans over the years have had amendments that we've wanted to bring forward that would always go down on partisan votes. And so we are ready to go to work with the governor should he want to engage with us. He will see our proposals moving through, though.
Can we hear from the new chair on this as well? Robbins, would she speak to
Just
it?
briefly, if that's okay, Chair Robbins, if you could just talk briefly about your committee.
Hi, Representative Kristen Robbins, 37A. So I'm very excited about this opportunity. I appreciate the governor's proposal that he put out on Friday, but it's sort of like the fox guarding the hen house. We need to have legislative oversight of agencies in the executive branch, and that's the purpose of this committee. So we will be having hearings, we will have subpoena power. We look forward, this should be a bipartisan issue. I look forward to working with my colleagues, working with the governor's office, because it's in the best interest of the taxpayers of Minnesota that we find and stop this fraud, and then put in place policies that will make sure that enterprise-wide in the state, we have internal controls that are going to be more effective. So I look forward to it. I think we'll have a great team and very robust hearings. I encourage you all to attend.
On another priority, thank Paul Bloom with Fox 9, to make Minnesota safe. Done a lot of reporting in the area of juvenile crime, juvenile justice. I don't know if it's too early, obviously some much bigger issues heading into the legislative session being discussed in this room. But anybody in your caucus that would address it, and specifically as it relates to the crisis that we really have pinpointed on where to send these youngest of offenders, this 10 to 13-year-olds that will eventually, with the new
age of criminality take effect next year, you're concerned about that.
Yeah,
Is there anything worth addressing there?
Our chair for public safety is Chair Paul Novotny, and he and his committee have been doing a work on a number of proposals coming through. I don't have anything specific for you, but that is going to be a priority. When we have repeat criminals, young criminals, and then those that are not held accountable later, that is a problem. The earlier we can get things addressed with those youngest and help them change their lives around, of course we want to do that. Watching for more proposals though as it comes through. Great
Back to
question.
the issue of the quorum. If you do not have a quorum on day one or week one, are there loopholes? Are there other things under state law or constitution that you can work around that? Or what would likely happen?
Our expectation is that we have a quorum with 133 elected members of the House of Representatives that will be there day one at the start of session to start the work in the House.
But if that doesn't happen, do you have any recourse? Is there any way to work around that?
We will be looking at all opportunities to work through that, but House Republicans will be there day one on January 14th, ready to get to work for the people of Minnesota.
How are you possibly gonna enact, or pass some of these goals with all of the focus being on who's in the majority, who's not in the majority, who's on the committee? I mean, it really doesn't seem like this bodes well for this legislative session. It hasn't even started yet.
I would say that our focus as House Republicans has been all along to do the work of the people of Minnesota, which is coming up with these proposals, working hard. We will have hearings through the committees and start moving these along. We know that when there was 67-67, when a power sharing agreement was needed, we still knew at that time that we needed 68 votes, and we know that going forward. I would encourage my Democrat colleagues to join us on the things that Minnesota, that's nonpartisan, Minnesota is asking for these things. My expectation is Democrats are going to want to join us in that work.
Hey, Madam Speaker, designate, is remote voting going to be part of the rules, temporary rules?
At this point right now, in the temporary rules, remote voting is still possible in the House of Representatives. We are looking at that.
What might you do to change that, or you don't know yet?
That is under discussion right now.
Do you need 68 votes to elect a speaker?
We need 67 votes to elect a speaker. That was done twice in history. And so there's past precedent. That is fully what we're expecting, which is why I have said that I will be elected as speaker on the 14th.
Representative Nash, you've been talking about some legislation that you were interested in. Is it one of these bills that was highlighted today, or is there something else you?
Well, thank you, Tom. I'm State Representative Jim Nash. I represent District 48A. I'm the majority whip. And yeah, I've been talking about fraud for the last 10 years as I've served on the State Government Finance Committee, but there is an effort that I've been undertaking. And very, very quickly, it's a scoring system that would create, we'll call it a fraud note, that would take OLA recommendations that have been made to different agencies, and it would measure whether they have been fulfilled or not. So let's say the Department of Education or the Department of Health, we'll just pick a number. They've had 20 recommendations by the OLA that have been made for increasing internal controls. If they've implemented 2 of them, we're going to be able to score that. And as we move forward in the appropriation efforts, we'll be able to say, you've implemented 2 internal controls out of 20 recommended, and it is intended to make sure that all members who are going to be casting a vote there in committee are well informed so that they can say, you're not responsible with money, and we've seen rampant fraud coming out of just those 2 agencies alone. This is an effort that should be 134 votes in the chamber that will say, we don't like fraud, we're trying to take precautionary steps to make sure we eliminate that fraud, and simple information that's given to the legislators before they cast a vote, whether to appropriate or not to appropriate money, is very, very important. So
would that impact their ability to get the appropriation they're seeking, or what would be the ultimate goal?
Legislators still get the chance to cast a vote whether they're going to appropriate money or not, but I would be shocked if even my DFL friend not implement internal controls, that we should still appropriate that money. I'm hoping that it is a cautionary tale that is listened to by all legislators, and that something as simple as a numeric representation of the propensity for fraud would be something that everybody takes action on.
If the DFL makes it up to 67 members at some point during the legislative session, will you commit to resuming work on a power sharing agreement and potentially restructuring things if work can get done on there.
It's really interesting to see how there was the power sharing when we there is a member that was elected, lied to the constituents and to the state of Minnesota, decided to resign a seat he has never held, so a special election needed to be called. It's very interesting with that change because of the courts that all of a sudden our friends, our Democrat friends that were all about power sharing, when there is this change, they don't want to work with Republicans at all. It completely begs the question of whether or not a true power sharing was going to work when we see that Democrats are refusing to potentially even come into work. So to your question, whether or not we will resume power sharing talks, I can't answer that right now because it doesn't look hopeful. It does not look like they actually want to work with Republicans, and that's what would be needed if there was a true power sharing.
They stalled until a 67th member was elected.
We will do the work. Sure, we will absolutely do the work that Minnesotans have sent us to do, and that is electing me as Speaker on day one. We will start the committee work going forward. Whether they choose to show up or not is up to them.
And what
Do you
about
hope
that
to have
seat?
68 Republican votes by the time they're end of session when the rubber hits the road?
We know that there could be another special election. We have an election in Roseville that is not yet determined. We will have 68 votes to pass bills off of the House floor.
And what about that special election and the timing? We're gonna hear from the party chair. Do you think that was legal or constitutional for the governor to call that in that timeframe?
You know, the statute is very clear on how, due to an election contest, a special election is to be called. It clearly says that a special election can be called 22 days after the first day of session. First day of session is the 14th. Pushing that out 22 days. The special election should have been called February 5th. We fully, though, as much as we want that seat filled as soon as possible, we first expect our governor to actually follow the law. And that was not done.
And is the caucus joining the suit officially?
We are focused on the work that we're doing. The state party has gone ahead and filed this suit, which we know that they have every right to do, and we're supportive of that. But we've been focused on the things here at hand, doing the legislative planning and work while they've been handling it on the other side.
Unofficially supportive, not.
Unofficially supportive.
Okay.
Madam Speaker Designate, I'm just wondering, as Minnesotans are watching this at home, this sort of back and forth between yourself and your Democratic peers, what should they take away from this, and should they be worried about not passing a budget in time?
I fully believe that Minnesotans have sent us to do the work and that we can pass a budget that is fair, that actually has a number of these things included, that is not overtaxing Minnesotans anymore. Minnesotans expect us to do that work, and this is a perfect opportunity for our Democrat colleagues to prove that they will be willing to work with Republicans, even in this case where they've pushed our voices out and our vote. Obviously, they didn't take anything over the last 2 years and didn't want to work with Republicans anymore at all. And so now this gives them the perfect opportunity to step in and say, you know what, even though we have to have a special election and we lost the tie, we're willing to do what's right for Minnesotans and step in and work together. Minnesotans should expect that that budget would be passed. It would be a solid budget and it will be passed on time.
What about the Senate? Have you talked to your friends that are in a tie now over there and what that portends for session?
We could tell them what it was like to be in a tie for a short time. Now, obviously, we are in that organizational majority, but yes, we have been in communication with Senate Republicans. We have not been in communication with Senate Democrats. They have not engaged us in any way.
Well, what does that portend for session? I mean, could we be in complete deadlock if both chambers are tied?
It's really interesting to me to know that there is bipartisan work that can always be done, but to watch a party dig in and refuse to work in a tie or in an organizational majority is incredibly disappointing. This is a time where balanced government was what Minnesotans wanted. This is a time to prove that it can be done. It's going to be up to our Democrat colleagues, both in the House and the Senate, how much they actually do want to work with Republicans.
Do all of the Republican caucus members in the House live in their districts?
Yes, all Republicans in the House of Representatives absolutely live in their districts.
Can someone talk about, it sounds like there's gonna be a crackdown on people without legal status utilizing state programs. I'm wondering if someone could talk about that. It was mentioned.
I can take that. We know that the spending that was done over the last year to the North Star Promise Act, the free college, basically, where I just want to remind everybody, nothing is free. So that's taxpayer-funded college education. We believe that taxpayer-funded college education should be available to Minnesotans that are here legally.
Wouldn't you have to repeal or update the Minnesota Dream Act in order to do that?
There would be a number of things that we would be looking at to accomplish this. That free college, taxpayer-funded college, is already out of money, and it's very interesting that as that bill was written and passed into law, that it didn't take into consideration those students that were going to choose private education, but only public education. And so there's a lot that needs to be changed in order to make that workable for Minnesotans, for Minnesota taxpayers and students that would be able to take advantage of that so that they would have their opportunity to make the best educational choice that they would like to make.
You mentioned gas tax increase. Can you clarify, do you want that rolled back?
We need to roll back as much of these automatics that were put into place because we do know that we're headed to a deficit.
Are you taking it for granted you'll have 67 votes on everything? There's been seen some words on Twitter that have been critical, insulting of you, Madam Speaker-designate. And I wonder if it's clear that you've got 67 strong votes in your caucus.
I know House Republicans have completely agreed that I have 67 votes for Speaker. We are completely unified on that. I have no doubt in my mind.
How about the rest of the agenda going forward?
We have still not completely developed that, the rest of the agenda. We obviously have the priorities that you'll see here, and we'll move through the committee process as we bring those forward.
Are you starting to talk to Democrats about any of these items, maybe even like the nuclear moratorium, if you could get a vote or something on that?
We will continue talking with our Democrat colleagues should they show up for work.
Have you talked to the governor recently? Has he reached out amid all of this?
The governor has not reached out, but I have reached out to his office just a few weeks ago and asked for a standing meeting. I think that would be the best way as we're working toward the end of session, but the best way to really start that. I know they received my request and acknowledged it, but they have yet to set a standing meeting with me at all. Thank you.
Thank you.